EPA OAQPS, who's going to present on air trends report updates. She began her role at APA in September of 2019, joining her group's efforts in data analysis, data visualization, which is an important concept today, and communication of air quality data. And I can't emphasize communication enough. Being able to communicate to the public and then for the public to somehow try to understand. She graduated with a BA in environmental science from Scripps College. And with that being said, take it away, Julia.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. And thanks everyone for being here and having me. I'm going to share my screen and we'll dive right in. It should be about a 20-25 minute presentation. And happy to answer questions the best of my ability, and we'll take it from there. All right. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes,
okay,
I am.
All righty. Well, hello, everyone. Again, my name is Julia Black. I'm situated here in North Carolina out of EPA's Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards. And it really is my pleasure this year to get to walk you all through the key highlights from our trends report through the year 2021. So this is a premier product that comes out of my group, the Air Quality Analysis Group. And I think before we dive in, it has some interesting history I'd like to share. So it really has a significant place in OAQPS's heart and history. It began as a paper copy produced each year in 1973 on to 2016, after which my group then converted that paper report into the interactive format you'll see today. So I think that's a neat story, and also that the interactivity that this report brings is pretty cool. So there's navigational tabs that I'll be showing you. There's also the ability to interact and customize charts and data and extract that for yourself. And then this report just serves as a great high-level summary of a lot of information and points users to dive deeper as well. So I think it functions a lot better than paper, and is just a really neat product to get to present to you all. So just as some kind of housekeeping organization, I'll be walking us through the report, just scrolling, but kind of as an overview of what we'll talk about. I'll be starting at our homepage. We'll cover kind of an introduction, really just looking at nationwide trends in air pollutant concentrations. We'll talk about economic growth briefly. And then we'll go to the next section, which looks at criteria pollutant trends. We'll touch on visibility and trends related to visibility, as well as a section on air toxics data that's coming from our ambient monitoring archive. And then lastly, we'll get to what I think is pretty exciting, the spotlight section. So this is a piece in the report that changes each year. These other sections are routinely updated and have been, I think, pretty much present in the report since 2016. So I'll make sure to focus on kind of the areas that change, but this is the section that changes each year. It's an opportunity for my group to highlight a topic of interest. Very appropriately this year, we're centering environmental justice concerns and talking about our more routine updated air toxics information to get to the public. And then that'll bring us to our summary section and we can open it up for questions. So I'll go ahead back to the home page and we can dive right in. I do believe you have the link to this trends report. If you'd like to follow along, feel free to open it up in a browser. This report is housed on our trends page. So that's epa.gov/air trends. All right, so let's dive in. Welcoming us is our starting page here. So we briefly know EPA's work for over 50 years, working to improve air quality. And this report is typically titled Our Nation's Air, and it summarizes the latest full year of data that we have. And so again, we have this report, the most latest version, active as the splash page on the AirTrends website. You can also find those historical interactive reports, and I believe also the PDFs for the even older reports. So it's a great resource for folks. And then I would like to call attention to this one-page highlight summary document. You can click that and it'll pop up in another browser. I just find that very fascinating how my team works to try to capture all this information and make it succinct in a one-page summary document. So kind of fun to check out. All right, so that'll bring us to our first section here. The first chapter is the introduction. This is really just keying up that first just the introduction of our nationwide trends. So it does note that since since the inception of the Clean Air Act and the implementation of the Clean Air Act, the combined emissions of criteria and precursor pollutants have dropped by 78%. So that brings us into kind of our first interactive piece here. So this section is showing, the chart on the right is showing nationally how concentrations of air pollutants have declined over the trend period. And so on the left here, we're showing nationally, we're listing out those pollutants, and then you can see their percent of decrease on the right. And I'll show the interactive piece of this chart. We'll spend our time on the concentration averages tab, but if you'd like to look over at emissions totals, you can do so as well. And so here on this chart, what we're showing is the most recent standard is that dotted line. You can see the percent above or below the NAAQS. And then these trend lines for each pollutant with the year that pops out in that box. So as I move my cursor from left to right, you can see, you can trace different pollutants and just kind of see that dramatic drop for various pollutants. And really what's great about this plot is the ability to turn off trend lines. So if I'd like to just look at SO2, which is that dark blue line, that really shows the dramatic reduction from 1990 to 2021. And you can also, if I wanted to just look at that and customize this chart for myself and extract this data, I'll be pointing to this ellipses a lot. But this is pretty much present on every chart in the report. That'll allow you to print, capture this data. You can grab a snapshot and put it in a report of your own. Just a really great feature to allow people to dig into this data a bit more. And before we move on from this section, wanted to turn on the two trend lines for our PM 2.5 standards. You'll recall nationally from 2019 that we really had lower wildfire effects. In 2020, we had prolific wildfires out west. And then in 2021, we're seeing something just a little different. So in 2021, we didn't have as big of a fire season, but we're seeing that annual average, which is the magenta line, steadily ticking upwards. And then the daily standard for 2021 actually ticked downwards. So I just wanted to tee up that topic, and we'll revisit that later with some of my group's kind of preliminary analyses as to what's going on here and what does this potentially mean down the line and for our trends. So just recall that uptick later, but we'll move on for now and revisit that in a little bit. So there's some other sections here in the introduction tab. You can directly click on those, or I'm going to be scrolling through. A lot of these provide background information for folks maybe less familiar with air pollution. So this section is discussing what is air pollution consisting of. So gas, particle, contaminants. Users can watch this animated video on the right. And then a great feature of this report is that interactivity. So the ability to click on this button, learn a bit more about those 6 common pollutants that the Clean Air Act is requiring us to set standards for. And then the next section here, a bit more background again, but this is looking at emissions. So this tab is really showing a snapshot of our best estimate for 2021 emissions. These are projected out from our latest NEI year, so that would be 2017, 2018 in some cases. So we're working to release the 2020 NEI. But for now, this is our best snapshot for the latest year. And so here we're showing generally listing out kind of those source categories where our emissions of air pollution coming from. And for folks that want to take a deeper dive and also access our emissions data, you can go to the Air Emissions Inventories website, and that's really a great place to start to dive a lot deeper than this snapshot. So this chart, as I've said, is showing those source categories, national emissions broken out. If you'd like to include or hide various categories, you can just toggle those on or off. And right now, I think I'm showing us totals. I've got that selected. You could also look at percentages. So if you're ever curious, those ellipses typically unlock some nice customization features. All right, and then moving on to our last section in the introduction, again, some background information here, talking about air pollution's health effects and environmental effects to talk about those secondary standards as well. So you can actually drop down each one of these components, pollutants, to learn more about their specific effects. And then these statements are reviewed each year by our colleagues in the Health and Environmental Impacts Division. So just wanted to make sure folks are aware this is a very collaborative report that my group releases, but a lot of folks provide information for us. All right, so that brings us to our second chapter here, the growth chapter. This section is really touching on the idea that economic growth can continue to occur while emissions improve. And so I'll point out two interesting dips we've seen in some of those growth areas in the past. So here on the right, these are the various growth areas that we're looking at: gross domestic product, vehicles, miles traveled, population. You can turn those off and you'll see how the y-axis adjusts. And then we are plotting the aggregate emissions, so 78% reduction below. And just those two notable dips I think are interesting. For GDP in 2008, we see that drop. And then more notably and recently, the stay-at-home orders, the heightened stay-at-home orders in that springtime of 2020, we really saw a dramatic drop in VMT. But for 2021, this latest year, we're really seeing the trends we'd previously seen resume. And again, you can extract this data and customize it to your needs. All right, so then that brings us to what I call really the bread and butter of this report. It pulls in a lot of data. I think it does a really nice job of pulling in those data sources and allowing people to dive deep into our monitoring sites. So this is going to be looking at the criteria pollutant trends. And just before we dive into that section, another collaborative effort, NASA provides us this background video. So this is showing NO2 concentrations from satellite imagery from the year 2005 to 2021. So you can see in some of these areas, we've seen pretty dramatic improvements, and we know that NO2 is released when coal and gasoline are burned. So it's really an indicator of economic activity, and neat to see those improvements from satellite. So I'll pause that video and let's dive into really the data-rich section again of this report. All right, so here we've got criteria pollutant trends. I'm going to be using the ozone NAAQS just to describe each element, and then we'll revisit that PM 2.5 kind of nuance we saw for the year 2021. So here you can see we're pointing users to select a NAAQS. So from this drop-down list, you'll select your NAAQS, and then these plots will update. So the top plot is going to be showing concentration trends. The bottom plot will be showing emissions trends. And these plots are really, they're updating to reflect the standard you've selected. So the emissions plots will be relative to the pollutant they're affecting. So you can see if I selected a different NAAQS, the emissions adjust to be appropriate for that NAAQS. All right, so we've got ozone here. Before we move on to the map, this section here showing the trends in concentrations. So here, similar symbology with that dotted line representing the most recent national standard. The national average amongst all the statistics sites will be in black. And then if you go over to the map and select a specific site, you'll see it plotted in purple. So I'll hover over these a sec so you can see how those kind of adjust. And then that blue band is showing that middle 80% amongst all the national statistics sites, just to give you kind of a gauge of where that monitor sits amongst all the sites. And then these plots, again, you can customize if you'd like to just look at a specific source category. So take a peek at that. For ozone, you'll see NOx and VOC emissions. And then just to hone in a little bit more on this map, you'll see there's a time series. You can start at the beginning and actually hit play, and it'll march steadily along. I've queued it up to 2021. And you'll see that these bubbles are representing values above or below the most recent standard. So these are monitoring sites. So for our purposes, I'm actually going to be looking at the ones above the standard. And I'll show you, again, the ellipses are your friend. So if you want to show all sites to improve coverage, if you're not as concerned about it being a trend site, because it has to meet completeness criteria and various other criteria to be considered a national statistics site, you can click show all sites and you'll see every site that's collecting data relative to that NAAQS. So now that we've got a lay of the land of what's here, I'm going to go back to that, revisit that PM 2.5 trend and that uptick. So let's look at the annual standard. We have annual standard and the daily standard. That's really to capture the short and long-term effects of PM 2.5 exposures. So the annual standard here, I just kind of wanted to revisit our our reasoning or what we're thinking is going on with that steady uptick. So you'll see there's that uptick going on here because the emissions are estimated. There might not be reflecting that nuance yet. But essentially what we're thinking is largely wildfire activity is affecting this. So recall nationally in 2019, you can use this bar. Wildfire activity nationally was lower. 2020, really prolific West wildfires. And then in 2021, some West fires, and then just a little bit of different distribution. So what we saw is downwind effects that were felt throughout 2021 in the eastern United States. We also believed colder winters enhanced nitrate formation, maybe increased residential wood combustion. And an example that a site that shows this uptick nicely is the North Birmingham site. So you can actually click on Alabama, or you could select from this list of states. And if I hover over that site, you can see it's plotted now on the left-hand side. And that is showing that uptick from 2020 to 2021. And just kind of an interesting area that was having local wildfire effects. And then one other piece we wanted to show you was the daily standard here. So the daily standard is helping us, it's more event focused, looking at peak days, wildfire activity. And interestingly, if we go to, oops, here, 2019, again, we can kind of see those pieces I've said out west, prolific in 2020, little bit of different distribution in 2021. If we click on a site up in Montana, this is an interesting one. So in Libby, Montana, it's an example site that's really strongly affected by wildfires in the recent past, as you can see on that plot on the left. And it's also an area where air quality progress that had been achieved from residential wood stove changeouts, that progress has been obscured because of wildfire activity. So just some interesting notes related to wildfire impacts, and definitely a challenge that we'll be facing going forward here. So just wanted to use this space to show you how you can really dive in and look at events. You can use the time series bar and extract this data. So maybe a lot of uses for you and your constituents. All right. So just for the sake of time, let's go ahead on to some other pieces here. I know there's a lot of information. So I think this chart's neat. It continues to discuss that story behind our data. So this is helping us understand different components in PM 2.5. So PM 2.5 speciation data is what's being displayed. It does lag a year behind due to processing time. So this is through 2020. But it's really useful in looking at what sources are impacting the data record. So you can see on the left-hand side, we've listed some different components that make up particle pollution. You can see those are listed out here. And then I've got a site that I'd like us just to look at, again, in relation to wildfires. If I select this site in Sequoia National Park, and we can actually maximize that for a little better viewing, you can see we've broken out these trends in annual and also quarterly summaries. And if I wanted to look at wildfire impacts to the data record, I'd want to see a high presence of organic carbon. So if I turn off these other categories here, just to look at organic carbon, another great interactive feature, you can see that wildfires looked like they were pretty high in 2018, 2020, and we can confirm that. We know Sequoia suffered from the Camp wildfire in 2018 that destroyed Paradise nearby. And again, 2020 is showing high wildfire activity. So that confirms other stories we're seeing, and just I think this piece is very helpful for diving a little deeper into our data. All right, and now just move along here. So our next two pieces that make up the NACS chapter are both story maps that are updated annually. So you may have seen these before. So I won't pop these out and go through them just for the sake of time, but feel free to do so yourself. So this first story map here is a look back. So what it's doing is showing our air quality index trends. So that's our color-coded index that we use to communicate daily air pollution. Again, we can use this real estate to point folks to AirNow's website, which we know is highly utilized, especially during air quality events. And then this story map here shows 35 major US cities and looks at AQI days that were 101 or greater value. And then the last piece here is another story map that's updated to show the most current non-attainment areas, and it's showing the improvement of air quality. So encourage you to check those out on your own time. And that'll bring me now to our next section here. So the visibility section, we're able to point to EPA's progress in protecting Class 1 areas, wilderness areas, protecting those scenic vistas for future generations. And this page, similar symbology. If you click on a site, you'll see it's plotted in purple. That blue band is the middle 80%. The national average is in black. And you can look at trends for visibility on the most impaired days or the clearest days. And you can export that data again. And I think this is a great place where we point folks to the regional haze rule, which is what's helping to achieve these visibility improvements. So just, again, a high summary information, but kind of empowers folks to learn a little bit more. All right, and now to our air toxic section. I do want to leave some time for the spotlight. So this section here is showing improvements as a result of reductions in air toxics emissions. And so what we're doing here, we're pulling in data from our ambient monitoring archive. So the air toxics data comes in. We have most of our data records from 2000 to 2018 as a large result of air toxic programs that are looking to monitor hazardous air pollutants. And so here we've got users can select an air toxic from this drop-down list, and those will be displayed again with the same kind of symbology on this map. So you can look at the different sites and different pollutants as you'd like. And we do note, I'll just call attention to this, that there's increased interest in ethylene oxide data, and that there's become consistent nationwide collection starting in 2018. As of right now, we don't have enough data to assess trends, which is why we're not pulling that data in here. But we do point folks to this website to better understand EPA's work in understanding background levels of ETO. And then an exciting piece of this section is our first chance to point out our new air tox screen, so air toxic screening assessment. This is replacing NADA, as you've heard. It's EPA's screening tool that provides communities with information about health risks, and we point folks to learn a little bit more information there. All right, and then that'll bring me to our spotlight section. So as I said at the beginning, this is a fluid, dynamic piece of the report. If you go to the archived versions, you'll see these are fairly similar from year to year, but this section is pretty unique. So in last year's report, we actually highlighted COVID-19 shutdowns paired with wildfire activity and how those affected the year's trends. But this year, I think, as I said, very appropriately, we are centering environmental justice concerns as well as more routine air toxics data updates in providing the public information about potential risks. So this section actually is going to have two data pieces that I'll walk us through. And excitingly, this will be folded into our permanent toxic section. So typically the spotlight section comes and goes. This year, we're going to be taking the spotlight section and plugging it into the permanent toxic section and routinely updating it. So I'm excited to be able to promote that and say that it'll be here to stay and really beef up the toxic section as well. So the two pieces that the spotlight section are showing us are looking at the health story behind air toxics. So this first piece is going to look at cancer risk, and then the second piece is communicating non-cancer health impacts. So these pieces should work well with the air tox screen mapping tool and the air tox screen website. If you're familiar with that, you might have seen my face demoing that tool earlier this year. But I'm excited to note that we've released air tox screen 2018 as of the end of August. And so this has actually been updated to include that latest update while we're kind of catching up to become an annual release. So what this element is showing us is really the air tox screen assessment that's estimating census tract level cancer risk based on modeling long-term exposure to air toxics. So from this drop-down menu, we've got it at the startup, symbolizing total cancer risk. So it's a blue scale gradient. The darker blue means higher cancer risk. But you can also select from this kind of drop-down list of hot topic air toxics to view individual contributions to risk for those. So I'll show you a few examples with cancer risk. Again, this is very high level summary information. So we are hoping folks will utilize this to then poke around the air tox screen website, where you can also download all of this data. But what this is, you can click anywhere on the map and you'll see that yellow highlighted feature is actually highlighting a census tract. So if we zoom in, you'll see it a little bit better. And you'll see that that census tract's cancer risk value is then plotted on this line. And you can kind of just pop around and see those changes. You'll see that some kind of identifying information about that tract is listed here, and then it just gives you a cancer value. So very high level, but a nice kind of starting point for folks interested in understanding risk in their area. So we know ethylene oxide is of interest to many. If we zoom in, I'll show you an example in the Chicago area. Give it 1 second here to render. So if we zoom in here and you select DuPage County, you can see those values are plotting on the line. I just wanted to call attention to this caveat. So we are aware that our data is behind and we're working to catch up with that. So to acknowledge the vintage of the data, there are tract related caveats that'll pop up. And these are the same as the ones in the air tox screen assessment and the mapping tool, but it's to say that risks in this tract are due in part to 2018 emissions of ethylene oxide. Emissions of ETO in this tract have gone down since 2018 and risks are lower. And so users are encouraged to visit. We have an emissions update document. I believe the 2018 document should be updated to the website any day. But there's more information about those kind of shutdowns. If there was a unit shutdown in that area, there's a lot more information in the mapping tool, but we did want those associated caveats to be present in this as well. All right, so just for sake of time, let's move to the next element to look at non-cancer hazards. So this piece is helping to tell that other side of the health story. So to estimate these hazards, EPA calculates a hazard index in our assessment, and that index is accounting for any potential non-cancer health effects to an organ or organ systems due to a long-term exposure via inhalation. So an HI value of 1 or lower means that air toxics are unlikely to cause adverse health effects. A hazard index greater than 1 could indicate adverse health effects. So in this kind of summary report tool, we are displaying census tracts that had HI values greater than 1. And so here users can select a target organ. This is not an exhaustive list. We're only listing those target organs from our assessment that had an HI value greater than 1. But if you'd like to see all of the information, you can download those files related to HI values from the website. So here I've got the respiratory target organ system selected, and then these blue dots are actually representing a census tract. So you can click on that dot, you'll see that there's a little table that populates again with that identifying information. And if you zoom in, since census tracts are small, that little dot will actually reveal the outline tract. Give it 1 second here. There we go. All right, and then there are some areas that have multiple systems or organs that have HI values greater than 1. If you select, you can kind of find those areas yourself. So for example, Stark County, Ohio has 2 areas with an HI value of 1 or greater. So you can just play along with that. And this will be complementary to the air tox screen mapping tool. We're working actually right now to develop a full-on dashboard to show HI values that will complement this as well. And again, we just are able to point folks to the air toxics data update website and really encourage people to use this as a launching point to find out more information. All right, and so that now brings me to our summary section. We again point folks to that 1-page document, And do note that approximately 102 million Americans live in counties with air quality concentrations that are above the level of 1 or more NACs in 2021. And then at the bottom here, we encourage folks to share this. There's actually source code documentation on GitHub that folks can use to recreate this kind of report, though there's a lot of heavy customization that went into this. And finally, we are able to point to other EPA air quality websites that the public can access the same data from. So with that, I'll stop my presentation and open it back up for questions. Thanks again for having me present to you all today.
Thank you, Julia. Anyone with questions, certainly unmute yourself and ask.
Julia, I have a bunch of questions, but I will let Leanne go first. Because no, you go ahead, girl. Do it.
Hey, I know, Julia, you had mentioned about the data collection. Could you go a little deeper in terms of how and where that data is collected and or reported to you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So a large portion of the data is submitted via AQS by our state, local, and tribal air agency partners. And so that we're just pulling, they're feeding us that data to AQS, and then we're pulling that into this report. I'm trying to think, the emissions data via the NEI, our partners, or our emissions inventories folks are providing that. Trying to think, our toxics data is coming from the ambient monitoring archive. So a lot of the data sources, like a lot of the monitoring data is collected from our partners, and then a lot of the data in the report is pulled from those websites that are at the bottom of the report.
Great, thanks, I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So Julia, this is Mark Stoddard with Indiana. As the ambient air quality standards change over time, becoming more stringent, how do you compare the years where the standards were less stringent? Because it could appear that the air is getting worse when in reality the standards are dropping.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I know that we update that, like that most recent NAC standard. I think I might have to revisit that question with my team, who's kind of the experts on this. So maybe I can revisit that question.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
I mean, it would seem to be an unfair comparison.
For sure.
If now you're not meeting things that you met, maybe last year or 5 years ago.
Right. I can get back with you on that. I know there's a way that they handle when NAC standards are updated and making sure you're not comparing apples to oranges and that kind of thing. But
yeah, Julia, how far back does the ozone NACs, for instance, go? So if you're looking at the 2008 standard compared to the 2015 standard, of course, you're going to look like, oh, all of a sudden all these people were in non-attainment, which they were in attainment before the standard changed. So does the Air Trends report, when it's looking at that historical, go back beyond that? That might get to your question, Mark, just saying, we've talked about that here in Michigan a lot, just as, how do we talk about that information, basically saying listen, your air didn't all of a sudden get worse. Right. In fact, it probably got better, but the standard is more stringent now because we want to keep tightening that down for health protective measures. And so it's going to look a little different. And I think that part of it is just kind of marketing that message appropriately too.
That's actually a great piece that we could probably communicate even better as well on our end.
I actually had questions about, all right, I'm going to start a little bit back. So part of my job, one of the things that I do every year is work with our air monitoring section on putting together their annual air quality monitoring report. And it always drives me insane because it's really old school and it's very cumbersome, and they always want it printed, which I think there's some value in that. Mm-hmm. But I love how this is formatted. And one of the things that we have in our report is we have all these graphs of trends, all these trend graphs, and they're great, except for they're so busy that it's very hard to look at them. So one of the things that you showed, that interactivity where you can turn off trend lines, you can turn off pollutants, you can scroll through, is amazing. And so I actually like already sent a note to our GIS team and I was like, hello, can we please do this? Because and she was like, that looks like it was really complicated, whatever. So my question is, getting to my question is, how much participation do you have in actually like setting up the report itself, or is your job more toward talking about the report, or are you active in that, the working of it? And the second part of that is, how long does that take, and are you guys constantly doing it, or is it something that you like launch on an annual basis type of thing?
Yeah, great question. So my role has truly just been the communicator of this year's report. Each year, it seems like in my group, someone will, get that chance to be the presenter of it. But I know in 2016, the lift to get this report produced was probably like 60% to 80% of someone's time. But now that production is over, the updating of it is actually pretty, I don't want to say simple, but it's probably 25% of somebody's time at the beginning of the year, like the first quarter. Maybe the first to second quarter. But I do not have a hand in updating the like behind the scenes, though we have met with outside folks who are interested in reproducing this themselves and shown them, kind of walked through that GitHub source code repository and just kind of helping them to understand what's that initial lift. So
no, that's really super helpful, because I know like, we'll do story maps a lot of times, and I can fairly easily turn that report into a story map, but it is still not as interactive as you would want it to be. And it's like slightly more cumbersome, I feel like, than that. And I think that pulling some of that data out of that report is really helpful. I know like for me right now, like we're still working on the 2021 data. Like I just got the final draft report, and then they're like, oh, we have to update these lead things. And it's like, geez Louise. So if we had this digitally, it would just be so much easier to push the updates out. But I recognize what you're saying about that initial platform. And I don't know that I would want to take away the ability to have a printed version. That does seem a little bit more behind the times, I guess, to say. Now I'll ask an actual air quality question. Mark won't stop me because I'm already talking. But so my question is, and I already think I know the answer, but when you talk about the air tox screening tool, the new one, and the air toxics information that you guys show on the air trends report, it's interesting to me because I know in Michigan we have like a very robust air toxics program. It includes a lot more toxics than what you guys are kind of looking at in the air tox screening tool. But my question is, when you're doing like the overall risk, cancer risk and things like that, I know that's not a cumulative number. So like, where do you find the calculation that you guys are using to kind of determine that? It's not additive, it's not necessarily cumulative. I understand the health indices enough only to be dangerous. So I just wonder if sometimes people look at that and they're getting a different message than maybe you want to put out there, if that makes sense. Just looking at that risk value and how it is on the line, and if you're on the side of the line, bad, and if you're on the side of the line, maybe not so bad, you know what I'm saying? So I just was kind of wondering what the thought process was on including that data, because we just started including air toxics data and I had to really push for it. I'm like, we're measuring all this, why are we not talking about it? Doesn't make sense. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have a fantastic frequently asked questions website related to air tox screen that the colleagues in AQAG that have done the modeling for this have put together to explain that this it's modeling long-term exposure. It's assuming 70 years of exposure. So I think a lot of our frequently asked questions tries to take care to answer kind of that nuance of assuming. I know for our results for 2017 air tox screen, there were census tracts out west that showed elevated risk from cancer risk from wildfires, but of course, assuming that wildfire would persist for 70 years at the same place, it's, there's limitations to that assumption. So I think that we are aware of kind of that messaging, and I think a lot of care has been, I can put the page, just direct link to this chat, but I would
That'd be
recommend
great.
that frequent questions page. It does a fantastic job. I was not the expert on that. I was helping to lead just the production of the mapping tool, but I can point you to colleagues who would be fantastic to dialogue with.
No, I know that's one of the things that we struggle with a lot. We did have some ETO sources here in Michigan that we dealt with on a very frequent basis and did a lot of public communication on, and that was probably the hardest thing to try to get people to be able to have perspective on, was that this doesn't mean you're outside for an hour. This means like you live here for a lifetime. You're breathing this at a certain level for your lifetime, which we're assuming is 70 years. And then your risk is higher. That doesn't mean you're going to get cancer. It means that you might, or you're more likely to. And that conversations around risk are very, very challenging just in general. And from like a environmental regulatory perspective, it's even more challenging because they expect you to be an expert, but you're not a health expert. So I don't know, very, very, very interesting.
Yes.
And I think I just want to say one other thing is I love your presentation style. I'm going to say one other thing. I really love the one pager. I think that's awesome. And
Cool.
I'll let other people have questions now because I know they do.
Thanks, Jennifer. I appreciate that. And one last thing I would say is my colleague who's kind of the probably the implementer of the, going in behind the scenes under the hood and updating it each year is David Mintz, and he would be fantastic if you have any kind of development side questions. We've met with people before, but he would be a great contact for that.
So don't be shy, ask your questions. She's definitely friendly and willing to answer.
I'll try my best.
Well, I guess if no one's going to ask, I don't want to be manipulative, but do some of these reports, or do these reports drive future goals and projects based on trends that you're seeing that you want to turn around or maybe continue because they are improving?
That's interesting. Yeah, I think my team is very analysis focused, and so I know I mentioned kind of those preliminary analyses that happen. We kind of have like in my group, there's kind of pollutant experts, and I think that they definitely take these reports and kind of run with them, or talk about story map ideas. I know we're really interested in continuing that messaging behind air toxics and trying to think about story maps that might help better inform the public, but also be transparent and not confuse people. So yeah, I think this product is very helpful as a launching board, but I can't claim too much credit. It's very much a group effort, and I was just lucky to get to present it this year.
I think, like most of us, we rely a lot on networking with our peers, and that helps out a lot. Let me ask you this: with the air trends, do you differentiate between transportation and non-transportation?
Yes, I believe we do. Gosh, I might not be the best person for that. I know that we, the source categories we break out into we do highway vehicles and then non-road mobile. Was that your question, or?
Well, I'm just thinking, like in the Chicago area, and then large metropolitan areas where you have a lot of crisscrossing interstates. You may try to ratchet down a lot of businesses, say like on pollutants that lead towards the formation of ozone, but maybe a large contributor is the transportation sector.
And I
And you-
thought there was like a map that you could drill down into that showed like the states by county, and it would say what percentage they thought was attributed to certain industry types, including mobile, which I could be lying about that, Mark, but I'm pretty sure that
No, you
there
may.
is.
You may be right on that.
Yeah.
I just may not.
Because I think it's not based on emissions reporting, right? Like we would consider it with industry, but they are looking at the measured data from AQS and looking at emissions reporting, and some of that is like tied together. So they do try to parse out what could be mobile from mobile. And I'm sorry, I'm speaking words for you, Julia, but this is my understanding. So now you get to correct me if I'm wrong and give me a C- instead of an A. But it is, and you just wonder like how accurate that is, I guess. But I think there is a way that they kind of look at that so that it's not all necessarily being attributed to things. So when we are in ozone non-attainment and things like that, you can look at specifying what kind of actions or rulemaking might be more productive to actually lowering ozone, which in my experience none of it really seems to work that great. But that's kind of my understanding of that. And I don't remember what part of the map it's in, but I'm pretty sure it's in there somewhere.
I'm satisfied with your answer. I don't have much else to add. I'm sorry about that. I'm happy to find out more information if you're able to send me your question.
Well, and some of this, in reality, this isn't, our jobs. Most of us primarily focus on assisting small businesses with their air quality, and a lot of people do multimedia stuff needs. So this is sort of ancillary to some of that. And I think it can be part of the conversation when we're working with small businesses on how to, integrate with your community, what's already there, where could they find information about, things like that. So we're always looking at ways like, how do we tie this to small business? How do we tie this to how they work and what information they might need to be more successful in what they're doing, and to garner an understanding with them on what kind of industry is going to be helpful in certain areas and what they might need to do differently, and so that they can understand what their obligations are under the law. So I think this is, like I said, it's more like peripherally related to, most of the work we do, but it's also like really interesting. And just from like a national standpoint, or even like Mark said, from a metropolitan area to a state to a national standpoint, it's interesting to look at how far we've come. When I do training on emissions reporting, I always show the trends maps, and I go, this is where we were when the Clean Air Act was promulgated in Michigan. We started our first rules in 1967. We have numbers going back to that. I said, this is where we were. This is where we are now. So it's not like we're not making progress. I know sometimes it feels like we're not making progress, and there's nothing better than like a graph that goes like this to show like there is progress being made, to kind of get people to understand that the changes that have been made over time have been productive, even though they might not seem that at the moment.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's helpful context.
Mark's so patient. I'm just wondering if there's any other questions. Anybody have any other questions for Julia before we let her off the hook? I don't think so. It doesn't look like it. Mark, thoughts?
I concur with Leanne. Thank you very much, Julia.
Thanks for having me, everyone. And if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to put you in touch with the kind of technical experts behind the data as well.
Well, and I was going to say, I might ask you if you can give this presentation to other groups. Are you open to that?
Let me
On a limited basis?
Well, let's this is Rhonda. Let's talk about that. Jennifer, like what other groups you're interested in, then we can work with Julia and the office to see what we're able to do.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. Cool.
Before people leave, our next presentation will be helpful for me. It'll be a couple people with EPA OAQPS to talk about CDX CEDRI Train the Trainer with a small business focus. And Jennifer and I are going to meet with them just to refine the scope of this. For them, they think, well, hey, we got all this information that everyone would see on the website, so they should already know what it means and how it applies. But, you know, if you're not used to an online data entry system, you know, or you have to make changes that you don't make very frequently, it could be a little confusing to kind of either start up or kind of remind yourself, what did I do last time? So I'm looking forward to this. It'll be October 18th. Again, the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I look forward to everyone, and including those who weren't able to participate today. Again, thank you, Julia, for presenting, and I wish everyone a good afternoon.
Hey, Mark, before everyone leaves, I do have one check raised if I can.
Okay.
Speak to it. So we are in the planning stages for oil and gas trainings to come up the fall of this year, like within the next, fall of this year is coming up soon. We have not settled on a date yet or dates for these trainings, but I want to get a pulse check from all of you on the call to see what day of the week works best. We are looking at evening trainings, meaning maybe beginning at 6 p.m. or if it's something preferable during the day. But I want to get a pulse check, like if there's a certain day that works best for the SBEEPs and other small business stakeholders. Can anyone advise on if one particular day of the week works best?
Yeah, I'm wondering if someone who's good at those Survey Monkeys might be able to come up with you know, something where you have Monday through Friday, and then maybe something generic like morning, afternoon, evening, or something to that effect.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have the time to kind of develop. We have to get things. We're in the planning stage like this week, so I have to set a date.
Okay.
So I just didn't know if there were like standing meetings like on Tuesdays.
Yeah, generally
Thursdays, but we are looking at evening trainings. And so I guess there's two-part questions. One, are you okay with evenings trainings beginning at 6 p.m.? That is something that we heard back from the meaningful engagement call we held about a month or so ago. Many have asked that we hold our trainings in the evenings because, you know, most people have to work and they don't have time.
Right.
And then the second thing is, you know, based on how many meetings you have during the day, you know, you may rather have it on a day that you don't have as many meetings already. So just trying to take a look at that and see if there's any burning.
So Rhonda, this is Donovan. If the businesses are requesting for an evening meeting, I think absolutely go with that. Because they're the target audience for something like this anyways. So if it makes it convenient to them, I would definitely say go with that. If we're able to join in, great. If not, you need to focus on your target audience.
Mm-hmm.
As far as our concern would be, Thursdays, I think, are usually our freest days. So at least looking at national subcommittee type meetings, I think there's only like one that I'm a part of that usually meets on a Thursday, and it's only once per month. Most of our subcommittee meetings, as far as I'm aware of, are either a Tuesday or a Wednesday. There may be a few others, such as education, that may meet on another day, but general trend, I would say, is Thursdays are the more open.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
I also think this might be an opportunity to try to market to those states that don't participate as much. There's been a lot of Region 6 states. I don't know if Lloyd could speak out or speak up, because I think getting some of the Region 6 states, which are heavily oil and gas. Obviously, you have California, and then you have the Dakotas, and then maybe a few states. They certainly would be an opportunity. It would be great if they could somehow be willing or able to participate as well.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you, Julia.
Thanks, Rhonda. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Rhonda. Anything else before we leave? Any parting words, Jennifer?
No, I don't think so, Mark.
Well, have a good afternoon, and I will see you next month.
Bye, everybody.